Just listening in the last presentation, and certainly is very mindful for me in terms of being aware of certain key practices in the world, one of which is certainly be very much geared towards foresight, having this idea around sort of these upstream approaches to things, evidence-based decision-making, and so on. I'm going to approach the topic of security in a very different way, I think, only because I'm looking at this from a national security practitioner's perspective. I spent 40 years almost since I first started in the RCMP, long before CSIS was something as an organization, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, where I spent about 34 years of my life. In that, I joined CSIS on the day of its creation in July of 1984. The world was a very different place. The security environment was extremely different. I was a young intelligence officer on the old Soviet desk, and we were very much looking at threats in a very sort of a slow pace, a very structured way. We were looking at our threat environment around this idea that people may try to steal secrets or they might try to subvert a society. And now, through the years, then I saw that transformed incredibly, and I saw that work its way through to the age of counterterrorism, and now into the age of where we have great levels of awareness around cybersecurity, around our personal privacy, around the ways we engage through technology, both locally and globally. And with that, I want to walk you through some ideas I've just developed over the last little while around what sort of things should we be thinking about as we engage in this unprecedented pace involving technologies that really is the wild, wild west where there are no rules of engagement, and one where both, I guess, threat actors, those who look at ways at extorting and looking at exploiting technology and opportunity in malicious ways, and those of us who try to engage and of course, try to create greater levels of knowledge, understanding, and perhaps opportunity for ourselves and the ones that are part of our families and our community. So let's walk through this. I go through a pretty quick-paced approach through understanding the world, so bear with me and and it's just really just a stream of consciousness. So again, old enough, I said I've been at this for almost 40 years, and I think back on Y2K, the change of the millennia. If you recall, and this is probably something that you'll recognize, although maybe not, because some of it's a little fanciful if you can read the screen. So at midnight, a jet fighter mysteriously crashes. A little later on, ATM machines begin counting or spewing out $20 bills. A nuclear plant in Seattle threatens to melt down. Cities plunge into darkness as power grids fail. A hospital patient dies due to a computer glitch. 911 emergency phone services go dead. And computer-controlled prison doors unlock automatically and releasing hordes of deadly convicts. So you probably don't remember those moments back at the turn of the millennia, but it was a plot for a movie that actually appeared right at the time of the turn. And in that, though, we, of course, everybody was seized with this idea that the world was going to come to an end because technology would somehow fail us. So if I think about that, take that plot line for that movie and I reposition it in today's world, well, actually, you know what? Some of that stuff was pretty prescient. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of warnings, and a lot of indicators, early indicators, I think we should be mindful of. No doubt, we're in a world right now where supply chain, in terms of where do we supply the things that we depend on. Look at the food supply. Many base ingredients come from far off places around the globe. Thankfully, as previously discussed, there are regulations around most of that. Nevertheless, it's a very fragile, interconnected, interdependent system. The other challenge is this idea that we've had many skimming machines and stories where ATMs and banking services have either been interrupted or they've been subjected to being targeted from either local organized criminal groups or from far-flung places, again, around the world. We've had questions now of more increasingly the Internet of Things and the automation of devices, particularly medical devices, including things that are implanted inside our bodies that are now regulated through the advance of technology, which of course, because of their rush to design and their rush to delivery, quite often fail to meet certain security standards. We've had 911 services go dead. We've had cities plunge into darkness. Anybody in the GTHA from 2003 will recall precisely what that looked like. And there is an old adage that modern civilization is about 2 millimeters thick and 3 missed meals. After that, all bets are off. Well, if anybody was in Toronto in 2003, you saw that those 3 missed meals, things were getting pretty unspun fairly quickly. And of course, even last summer, we had a number of security alerts, including FBI, Department of Homeland joint releases or communiques around the targeting of nuclear plants and the power sector by foreign hostile actors. In other words, states, countries looking at this next new era of fifth dimensional warfare, which I'll come back to later. And of course, there have been the odd reports of ghoulish things going on and zombies attacking different places, but thankfully that remains in the realm of HBO and Netflix. All right, so we are, though, in more serious thought, upon reflecting the last decade plus, we're definitely in a new millennial of threats. 9/11 changed the world, as most of us who were sitting there looking, staring at our TVs or reading a paper in the old school versus what we're looking at currently on our phones or on our tablets and our laptops, the world fundamentally shifted. And one driven much more now by fear. And although it'll look like I'm going to walk you through a very fearful presentation, my point is fear is not the issue. It's about resilience. In order to avoid the moments of fear, you have to understand your threat environment. And you have to understand those who may want to cause harm or to disrupt our societies and our existence. So we're looking at things in a way that it's no longer local. When I first started doing drug investigations for the RCMP out in Vancouver, it was very local. Our target set was typically in some downtown area, and we could literally, if we were targeting, find some way to get into a restaurant and string a microphone off of a light bulb in a movie to be able to capture their personal conversations. Now today, threat actors are global, and the impacts of events far away have reverberations here. We collectively as Western society, and Canada has a role to play in that, are involved in the longest war. The wars of Afghanistan and Iraq have caused almost $2 trillion US in terms of cost. They have cost tens of thousands of lives of soldiers who have been exported there, and they've caused hundreds of thousands of casualties and deaths to the people who live in those countries and people who've suffered under either terrible regimes or the efforts to unseat them. So the effects have been large and they continue to reverberate, and we will continue to burden that cost for decades to come. Climate change, opioid crisis. We have life-changing technologies, things that are great promise of immunotherapy drugs, to the issue of how much these technologies will also invade our personal privacy and invade our personal space. We're also struggling with the issue of sovereignty, the sovereignty of the state to control everything, including central banks control currency, is now under question, all being disrupted by the technologies of the day. We're also looking at issues around trafficking in human beings, looking at the ways organized crime operate globally and affect things very much locally. And of course, we're looking at the biggest disruptor of all, a shift in our political community. And in terms of those basic fundamental things, since the post-Second World War era of construction, where we had certainties in our lives, whether it's the International Monetary Fund, whether it's the United Nations, NATO, and a number of other institutions that made a real big difference. What worries me most of late being an observer. I've been an observer of threat-related actors and around trend lines for, as I say, almost 4 decades. The single most important moment of transition, and I think the single most important injury point, is this issue that we have a breakdown in the trust model. And that trust model is one that keeps on getting shaken. It's the debates around the FBI versus Apple. 2 people killed a number of people in an American city. An iPhone is key to the investigation. Apple says, no, you can't get in it because encryption is more important than the issue of investigating a pair of alleged terrorists. Fascinating debate, incredibly difficult discussion, but one that continues to shape our thinking around the roles of law enforcement and how do we protect our privacy, including in the context of lawful investigation. Social media, we're giving it up, but we're also including ourselves in these moments of complete dissonance. We have these echo chambers of views, these echo chambers of political perspectives that are exclusive of all those who disagree. And that in itself is having incredible reverberations. We've had a number of high-profile people that are normally in positions of trust, the clergy, politicians, law enforcement officers, the list goes on, who are suddenly now caught up in certain things, and that works to undermine people's trust in the structures of our society. We have an epidemic of conspiracy theories. Everybody looks for that simple answer to complex issues. They're seeking out something that's going to quickly explain to them how things work, and that's why they go, aha, I always knew that's exactly what was going on. And of course, most of them are very unhealthy, they're completely untrue, but they satisfy a particular need, and of course, because of social media, they move around the globe rapidly. But beyond all that, and beyond the issue of the age right now, which has been counterterrorism, it's been the age of politically and religiously motivated violence. And although I was responsible for counterterrorism at CSIS for a number of years, I do believe we overestimate the impact of what that'll have in our society. We spend probably too much time, too much attention, too much money looking at something that has probably a very minimal to almost impossible to measure potential for having an impact. But we do that for a simple reason. Terrorism terrorizes. It's very effective. And the way media drives that particular image and that narrative, it of course shapes the way we think and of course creates that fear that I'm talking about that we must be very mindful of. But of course we have other things to worry about. So beyond terror, we look at disruption, look at change in our society. Gun violence has been key. And it's an important issue. It's one that has a number of causalities. There's a lot of things that drive it, which are too long here. But having been a practitioner in intelligence for a number of years and having seen a number of things, it's interesting how history repeats itself. The cycle of threat vectors have returned. Proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is now back on the agenda of national security organizations when we thought we had that problem solved at the end of the Cold War. We have this dislocation around, again, these political communities in transition. The European Union under stress. The threat of Brexit looms. We have a rising China. We have a revanchist or a regime in Russia that's only real goal is to disrupt Western society, including countries like Canada and including communities, or right down to the community level like Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, elsewhere. But we're mostly up against this, and I know every self-respecting hacker just hates this whole hoodie image, but nevertheless, we have another problem because it's pervasive and it's part of a threat that also is so amorphous that we don't really think about it very much until we read about it somewhere or we hear a story of yet another 50,000 sets of credentials, another 5 million, another 600,000 or 600 million credentials lost or found somewhere on a website on the dark web. That is, I think, the challenge of the era. So let's take a look at this quick video because I think it does explain. Quite often we think about cybersecurity, we think about it in the context of virology. There have been a couple of other worms like this, including NotPetya, that have had sort of a world-renowned impact. Take a look at the timeline when it appears here in a second. So we're into the first hours. You'll see patient 0 appear shortly in Ukraine. And then follow the timeline in terms of number of hours. In a very short period of time, we have a global pandemic. But it's not of the type of the Spanish flu or others that took 50 million people out. It's really about taking down the global communications infrastructure. It's about locking down with ransomware a number of organizations, some extremely well defended, some less so. Here we are day 3, it's still rampant. There's still no stopping it yet. Nobody's figured the kill switch at this point. And it's affected everything from the auto industry, transportation, even very well-defended organizations like the Russian Department of Defense, banks. It was completely agnostic. It attacked everything, everywhere, almost simultaneously. And it left us with few opportunities to understand it, let alone try to deal with it, because it was a global phenomenon. And it was moving faster than the speed of light. So that's a lot more of that issue around what should we really be worried about? The things that seem very apparent and that are highly amplified, or the things that remain just subterranean or just below the surface? And I'm arguing, obviously, that the data world matters more now than anything. So we're looking at a threat environment that, if that is true, then let's take a look at what sort of people are involved in it. I mean, there's a lot of evolving threat actors. Certainly organized criminal groups are now moving into the space. There's still profit and opportunity out of more kinetic energy things around the sort of typical things we'd see in movies around organized crime. But it's really now moving into that space where they can increase their profits and decrease very sharply their risks. And that means cyber. And that means going after people's money, their assets, and their private personal identifiable information. This is actually a picture of an FBI wanted poster. Yes, they look like they're all about 16 years of age. And they've perhaps never even met in person. They're connected globally through the networks, and they work together on shared targeting towards a simple motive: profit. And we have this guy. It's the average person. It's the person who's committing the CFO fraud. As you probably heard, as a letter goes out to the company or the firm or the association, and it says that, hey, June, it's me, Bill, I'm out here, I'm actually doing some business, I'm going to acquire something, I'm going to buy something, I'm going to invest in something else. Please send this money to me. And it does appear to be the CEO or the CFO making the request of somebody within the organization, and it works extremely well. It's that insider threat phenomena. And of course, we have a lot of adventurers out there, people who simply do it because it's a challenge. There's a subculture around the idea of going in there and breaking into things through the virtual world. Yes, there's a possibility that terrorist groups one day will go from this idea that they can have these catastrophic events like 9/11 where they can fly, take our own technology like an aircraft and fly it into one of our buildings, to one where they'll look to tackle or target critical infrastructure, to look to undermine it and bring it down and have the same effect of a 9/11. I just don't think it's quite there yet, but I would not want to exclude it from that possibility, because no doubt an organization like Daesh that's so proficient in exploiting social media and recruiting can't be that far off to be thinking about weaponization of that approach or that methodology towards other outcomes. So we're looking at now the world in a global context. Threats are no longer just local. They're not that example I gave you of trying to go after the highest level of then organized crime 30 years ago. That was simple work by comparison. Now we're mostly dealing with threat actors who live far offshore, live and operate in these permissive environments, quite often encouraged by their own governments or certainly sharing in the profits, and are outside the reach of these multilateral legal assistance treaties and other things to bring them to justice. So it's a complicated world and it's a complicated place to operate in. And you, by extension, by using your devices day in, day out, engage with that world and make yourselves vulnerable. So your target in this world, in this age, it's about information, but it's about personal information. What's most valuable on the internet and the dark web right now is not credit cards, as typically been thought of. It's really about that PII, that personal identifiable information piece that tells people who you are, where you live, what your name is, what your date of birth, driver's license. The richer the content, the greater the value. The more that's accumulated, the more it rises. And when you go on the dark web, you can see whether it's a very light profile of PII or a very deep one. And what they want is, again, the information that will help them assume an identity in the ultimate or in the best case scenario. If nothing else, to be able to be used to be able to benefit a number of other criminal activities, including registrations and buying things and so on. So we're in an age where I want to really emphasize that privacy matters more now than ever. It's an age where we do a lot of the stuff, we talked about self-harm a moment ago, we voluntarily give up a tremendous amount of information. We do this social media. We have a couple of sons, 27 and 30, and they are very much the epitome of that factor. It's the Instagram on everything. You're instantaneously in the moment, halfway around the world, you're telling everybody, my house is now empty because I'm actually sitting here having a pina colada in a beach in Mexico, and everything else is up for grabs. And this issue that other people are watching and listening, and they're finding opportunities to leverage the fact that whatever you provide allows them to target your organization or target your personal information. And I'll come back to a few more examples. There's also the more invasive, but obviously more involuntary way, is that quite often there are abilities now for threat actors to leverage whatever you say on LinkedIn and other parts of your persona, they certainly, once on your network, on your system, listening in, gather increasing amounts of information. And they may use it against you, or they may use it against others. And that's the point around all this sort of stuff. Now, ultimately, what's becoming, there's two main, I think, points that are critical around injury. And the injury one is ransomware. It's pervasive. It's being used in a lot of places. I've dealt with clients in private practice for 5 years before I came into my current role. And they, companies, organizations, individuals, their computers at home are ransomware. What do? You can call the police. The police will probably be very sympathetic, but the problem is they can't do much for you in that kind of situation. The other problem, of course, is, and I've helped people who have lost their identity. When so much was given voluntarily and so many things were taken involuntarily, and a rich picture emerges, and somebody assumes your identity, it'll be the 2 next worst years of your life. I guarantee it. It'll be the things that will make you wish that you could have had any other thing shy of a serious diagnosis. Because it is so difficult to recoup, and there are so many persons questioning whether or not you're actually the person trying to resume that identity, and in fact theirs, or just trying to perpetuate one that's already been stolen. That's the kind of the starting point where a lot of financial institutions and others begin from. So speaking of self-harm, there's another angle to this thing too. The threat surface keeps on enlarging. And what I mean by the threat surface, it's the points of connectivity. It's the number of things that we have, the number of devices, the number of places we apply those devices, such as an internet cafe, our office, our vehicles, on public transportation, wherever there's Wi-Fi connectivity. And we're also doing this again back to the issue of social media. I am active on social media. I have a Twitter account, I have LinkedIn, and I have a couple of Instagram accounts, mostly to keep an eye on my sons, but I don't really put anything out there, but at least I get to see what's going on. But otherwise, I'm very circumspect about what I do. It's the same way with the way I deal with, I love chatbots. I love these sort of Amazon things. They're kind of fun. We played with one at Christmas time. Somebody received it, one of my sons got one for Christmas. But I also sit there and stare at it and go, man, that thing really creeps me out. Because ultimately, anybody can listen. If something's on to active voice mode, it's waiting for you to call. But in the interim, the potential for recording and listening is great, as is your smart TV and all the other smart appliances that you'll be soon acquiring. The thing that I tell everybody is I have a very healthy relationship with Siri. I request her assistance frequently, but I always do it through the haptic touch. I always make sure I engage her with a physical touch, because I don't want to have the voice activation around my life. Because of course it comes back to that issue of people listening in. And it's just a principle. I got rid of one of these things in my office a little while ago when I first moved in. I bet you everybody has access to this somewhere, either in a boardroom, shared office space, wherever. The problem is, of course, I bet you all of you have been using the same codes to access that secure line forever, or that party line. There's a great series of pieces or clips on YouTube and otherwise where there was one involving the FBI and SOCA, the Serious Organized Crime Office in the United Kingdom. A whole bunch of officers got involved in a conference call. They used the same bridge, and they had a shared security code to get on. It's one that's bounced around probably for 10 years, maybe 20 years. It's been shared with employees who are now long gone. And of course, somebody chimed into the call, used the code, recorded the conversation, and it was more than just embarrassing. And those sort of things happen in organizations because people don't even lock down the bridge. They hear beep, 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 beep. They have no idea who's on the call and who's off the call. So I always encourage people to be very mindful of those sort of things. There was a study out not that long ago in the United States. I think about 30+% of Americans would do their IRS filings on public Wi-Fi, like at a Starbucks. People regularly engage. I never use Wi-Fi anywhere. I pay up in advance for a slightly robust data plan. When we travel, especially when you travel on holidays, when you travel on business, hotel, public transportation hubs like airports are notorious for being compromised, because usually they involve contracts going to the lowest common denominator in countries without regulations, without surveillance, without effective policing, and of course all they are is a honeypot. So when you log in, they own you. They own your device, and whatever you're doing, if you're doing your banking while you're in the Bahamas or in Mexico or Jamaica, not a good idea. Because you're providing all those threat actors who have the greatest span of control and the greatest opportunity to act, to execute, because you're in their environment. And of course, you're desperate. So keep certain things to do at certain places. We do online banking at home. We do it only from one specific device that we barely browse with. And of course, we clean the cache. We do all of the things. They're all one-on-one. They're things you can learn online. It takes a few minutes on all the best practices to continuously protect, especially your financial information. This goes back to that worst 2 years of your lives, trying to reassert primacy over your identity. It's something you never want to have to do. Here's the other problem. We live in blended lives. Our personal and private lives now basically move through this device for the vast majority of us, increasingly. I read a study a little while ago. This particular device, if you went back to when they first launched the iPhone, it would be worth about $3.6 million. The advances in technology, the glass, the memory, the processors, you name it, this thing in this iPhone 8 in my hand, which is an old generation now, will be worth about $3.6 million. What it means is that we have an incredibly powerful device that most of us are exploiting effectively. And we're using it, we're leveraging it, again, for knowledge, for opportunity, for wealth generation, and so on. But with that, though, we've come to this point where expectations of work, expectations from managing our personal lives, our children, our spouses, our significant others, drive us to a point where everything is driven through this. And of course, cross-contamination. Best practices at work don't always follow the best practices at home. People quite often open those joke videos and all those embedded PowerPoint presentations with gags in them. They're mostly infested with malware. And of course, they open those on their personal devices, and of course, then the next thing you know, they're into their other mail application, and they're looking at their business mail. Bad issue. We need that separation. I have my personal phone, I have my work phone. And never the two ever cross. Now, those are not opportunities everybody can do, but certainly at least be mindful of how you do things and stop opening stuff that's part of this chain mail of, again, usually humorous things that are do not click things or do not open things from people you do not know. Hover over that line. Take a look at the actual addressee, see if you recognize it. We're also now in the age of AI that's amplifying what bots can do. My father-in-law and I are the best two favorite buddies over single malt whiskeys. And we get together once in a while and have one, and the other day I received an email from him, and I thought it was a little weird because it was very curt, but it had a real line of whiskey, and it said, "You'll like this," and a link. I hovered over the link. It wasn't the LCBO, it was for something else. And then I realized, because I talked to my wife about it, his account had been one of those accounts compromised on Yahoo. And somebody had been spitting it out, but the AI bots were able to draw enough out of his emails, out of Yahoo, to be able to contextualize that string of phishing emails. And that's going to be our new reality. You must pause. I know we're tired, we're hard pressed, we open hundreds of emails in a day, but be very mindful of the senders. So we're also driven about, despite all that, there are a lot of things that people say, well, I'm sure we're going to get this all figured out pretty soon. Well, no, we're not. We're a world without norms. We're a world where privacy now is at risk because, yes, we're a little bit more aware. Edward Snowden made some incredible revelations. I'm of the view that I'm not surprised. You give $30 billion to the US intelligence community, they'll come up with really cool things. But with their lawful investigations aside, which I believe almost everything was, it still raised awareness, which is not a bad thing. I think it's good that people think now about bulk capture and data exploitation. Now that's done by, I'll call the good guys who have rules, but everybody on the darker side are doing it equally well, and they have no rules, and their governments support them. So that's a bit of a challenge. And we're also in this world where suddenly, we have the Facebook phenomena, we have YouTube, we have all these large commercial entities that are exploiting your information. You are the commodity. Your information is making Mark rich. Now, it's a social bargain. You've agreed to it. Remember when you read the user agreement in detail, and on page 63, it reminded you that he owns you? That aside was something that we've done that because we have something free. We got free stuff. And our free stuff has consequences. And that has to be better balanced. And I think that we need to be more discerning around what that free stuff is all about. And of course, we have this lunacy of, well, we rush out products and services. It's, oh, we'll fix it later. We'll get it done, get it out, get it sold, make money, and then we'll do our patch Tuesday and our patch Wednesday and our patch Thursday. And of course, those leave us with those who are securing networks, this zero-day vulnerability, because somebody out there has already figured out what that vulnerability is on that last release before the next patch has been released after that, and that becomes consequential as well. So there is no justice in the data world. There is no justice in the digital realm. It's just the real wild, wild west. So let me quickly move on here too to a couple quick thoughts. All this stuff is also amplified by the fact that we're bombarded by messaging, negative messaging, and these false narratives around what is truth, what is a lie, and what is actually going on in the world. And it takes those who are engaged in technology and social media things to be discerning and ask yourself those questions. So we're also looking at this sort of issue. We're here because Hamilton's is the theme, and we're looking at the community we live in, and we're looking at the issues that, well, aren't these threats really around targeting national defense and foreign affairs? No, they're not. Increasingly, they're about local government because they're data infused, they're centralized, and quite often the citizens are not quite aware, and mostly they're about critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure means everything to our lives. It sustains everything: heat, light, food, power, so on. So what's a girl or guy to do? I'm going to finish off with a couple quick thoughts around, I don't want to leave you feeling, because I'm sure right now you're feeling very positive and uplifted, but I'm going to try to finish off on a couple of positive notes. So here's what you do, because understanding the threat is job one, and that's the cost of situational awareness. In Ontario, that's what we've been doing. That's why they established my office. We're about this resilience, and resilience means understanding things that can threaten, understand things critically and thoughtfully what can change our lives versus things that are emotionally motivating around those threats. And of course, we look at all the municipalities and we help them understand that world. There is a viability prevention. This is not, you should not feel that what's the use. I just heard this Ray guy talk and he sounded like the world was falling down and everything was terrible, everything I touch is going to hurt me. No. That NotPetya, WannaCry virus, 80+% of that could have stopped if people had done their patches. When you get your alerts on your system at home to update your software, do it before you do anything else. Those are all the things that matter. Those things will keep you safe. Be aware of where you browse. Think about the sort of things that you share in terms of information, how you share it with your friends and family. Think about, for your organization or your personal life, what sort of things could threaten, what kind of things would want to target your information, and then build your strategy accordingly. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very, very simple. And share those risks. And be aware that everybody here has a responsibility to their own organization where they work, and they have a responsibility to their loved ones and their spouse to be careful with their information and the way they deal with it. Think about who touches your Wi-Fi at home. Is it locked down? Also think about this idea that I gotta be careful about blending my personal and my public life or my personal and business life. And then finally, think about, just keep things in context. Just do your thing. People are out there defending the network and they're testing that network and they're following up on stuff. And they're also thinking about defending and resuming their business. And that's something you should be thinking about. What would you do if you lost your identity tomorrow? What would you do if your business was locked down? Do you know where to go? Can you find a place to be? Can you find an alternative work site? Would you be able to sustain and do the things you do day in and have that day-to-day success without having a plan and exercising that plan? I don't think you can. So you must think of this interoperability. I must be able to work, live, and play from any number of places if access is denied due to something catastrophic, like a cyber threat. So last word, it's up to you. You need to be mindful of it, you need to be aware of it, and only you can contribute to the holistic part of our resilience. That complacency, that thing that this is somebody else's job, or this will never happen to me. I live in wherever, Hamilton or Waterden or wherever. It does, it matters most, and it's going to affect you unless you rise to the challenge and you shake yourself from any sense of complacency. Anyhow, thank you very much.